Hello, it's Sue Anstis here, and just before you listen to this episode of The Game Changers, I wanted to quickly tell you that my new documentary, Game On, The Unstoppable Rise of Women's Sport, is now available to watch on Netflix in the UK. It's a powerful film that explores the recent growth in women's sport and its impact across society. It will open your eyes to the challenges faced by female athletes and bring hope for a future where women and girls have equal access and opportunity in sport. I really hope you enjoy it. Now it's time for the Game Changers. Hello and welcome to the Game Changers. I'm Sue Anstis, and this is the podcast where you'll hear from trailblazing women in sport who are literally knocking down the barriers and challenging the status quo for women and girls everywhere. What can we learn from their journeys as we explore some of the key issues around equality in sport and beyond? I'd like to start with a big thank you to our partners Sport England, who support the Game Changers through the National Lottery Award. My guest today is Louise Minchin, a journalist, presenter, author and podcaster who many of you may know best from BBC Breakfast, which Louise presented for 20 years. What you may not know about her is her passion for endurance sport. Having raced her first triathlon in 2013, she went on to compete in her age group at 5 world and European triathlon championships, as well as undertaking some extreme events, including some of the toughest long-distance triathlons in the world. Her first book, Dare to Try, charted Louise's triathlon journey, and her second book, which has just been released, is called Fearless: Adventures with Extraordinary Women. Louise currently presents 2 podcast series, Push Your Peak for What Bike and Her Spirit, which encourages all women to take up exercise and transform their lives. Louise, you and I first met through the world of triathlon. So how did your triathlon journey start? What was the spark that began it all for you?
The spark for me, and by the way, I think you were much faster than me. The spark for me was in 2012, I spent most of the summer, like probably you did, and many of your listeners, watching the Olympics and being inspired by them. London 2012 just had a huge impact on sport in the UK, didn't it? And coming up to Christmas that year, the producer on BBC Breakfast said to me, I'm thinking of doing a Christmas challenge. Have you got any ideas? And they'd normally done cooking challenges. And I thought we can be a bit more adventurous than that. And I said, why don't you do something inspired by the Olympics? And what I love about ideas is they start small and sometimes they get really big. I didn't make it big, but she did. She came back a few weeks later, said, yep, what we're going to do is you're going to race in the velodrome against your fellow presenters in front of a crowd of 4,000 people. So just rewind a little bit. Exactly. Oh my gosh. I've never actually been to a velodrome, let alone sat on a bicycle and cycled it round a velodrome. I hadn't even sat on a bicycle with drop handlebars. So I was very, very inexperienced. I mean, it was way beyond the realms of my possibilities. Anyway, very briefly, on that night, so it was all broadcast on the telly, and I was in a team with Charlie State, and we were racing Bill Turnbull and Susanna Reid, and Charlie did an amazing time. So all I had to do, our times were going to be added together, was pretty much stay on my bike, because Susanna hated the whole thing. She was terrified, and I don't blame her. I was terrified at the beginning. And then Bill said to me, I overheard him saying, I can't be beaten by a girl. And that... your face says it all, and the gasp says it all. There is nothing more likely to inspire me to get a move on than that kind of comment. I beat him by, half a second, 5/100ths of a second or something ridiculous. But the key thing about it wasn't really beating him. It was just going over that finishing line. And with a bang, I was like, oh my gosh, I just remembered how much I used to love to race, love sport. Why have I not been doing it for 30 years? I gave up competitive sport when I was 15. And this is a key message, which I know you're really passionate about, because I didn't like the way it made my body look. And here I am, age 45, in the velodrome. And I'm like, that's it. Right. I'm going back to sport. I'm going to buy myself a bike. mean, my husband thought I was utterly bananas. I bought myself a racing bike, drop handlebars, special padded shorts, shoes with cleats, new Go Faster cycling helmet, you name it, all the kit. And he said, you're never going to ride it. Well, I've ridden it round the world, that bike. Not that bike. Obviously, I don't just have one bike anymore because that's the trajectory, isn't it? And very shortly after that, like you say, in 2013, I did my first triathlon. At that stage, a friend of mine asked me if she was doing it and if I wanted to do it. I didn't even know. I knew the sports, but I didn't even know the order of the sport. I knew the Brownlees were really good at it, and that's all I knew. And I just thought, well, why not give it a go? And I loved it. Absolutely adored it.
I love that. I love that story. And I love that ours is exactly, and I've read your books, I should know this, and we were doing things at the same time, but it is almost exactly the same time, because mine was Christmas, was waking up on New Year and saying, I want to do triathlon or whatever. That year. Wow. So into 2013, that was the beginning of it for me too. Well,
that shows you, doesn't it, how inspiring sport can be, and seeing sport on the telly and all the rest of it. And that's why it's so important how, that we do amplify stories, because there'll be lots of people who'll just go, oh, hang on a second, why don't I give that a go? And that's really brilliant.
Yeah, that's a spark, I say, that gets you started. And I had no idea. Again, I knew that you'd done the velodrome. I didn't think about it being in front of a crowd.
Yes.
As well as being live on television too.
There were 4,000 people shouting. It was so intense. And velodromes, I find them, I think it's forever scared me about velodromes, because velodromes are quite intense anyway, because the banks are so sharp and steep, and there are all the seats around it. But with 4,000 people, it felt like they were all on top of me. Obviously they weren't, but it was, it was amazing.
And no brakes on those bikes?
No brakes. And not even worse than that, there are no brakes. Your feet are attached to the pedals, and it's a fixed gear. So that means that if you stop pedaling, your feet still go round because they're attached to the pedals, attached to the wheels. Oh gosh, it still makes me get sweaty palms thinking about it. But I just loved it. I just, just reminded me when I was 15 and a swimmer, I used to get so nervous, but there's something about that burst of adrenaline that is very powerful and kind of addictive for me.
And can you talk us through a bit of your age group journey and how it felt the first time you pulled on that GB shirt with Minchin on it?
So if anybody's done any triathlons, and mostly when you turn up to a triathlon, you will see someone with GBR across their bottom. It's not quite the bottom, is it? Back. And I went to the first triathlons and I see these people going, gosh, they're in a GB team. Oh my gosh, what's that? How do they do that? And I didn't realise, and lots of your listeners will know this, that you can compete in your age group, and it's every 5 years, and it's so 40 to 45, 45 to 50. And I was in the 45 to 50s like you were. And I saw them and I thought, okay, let's find out how exactly they compete for the team. And the quick answer to that question is that you go to a qualifying triathlon and you have to get what's called, as you know, a qualifying time. And then you can go to the World and European Championships. And I think I went to, you said 5, and it may be 5, or it may be more than 5. I went to, as far as I can remember, I went to Chicago, I went to Spain, I went to Australia. Went all over the world, and it was the most wonderful, empowering, crazy experience. My first one, you talk about how I felt. I felt very proud getting my GB tri-suit. I really did. But I completely messed up my first race. It was in Chicago. I was immensely inexperienced. Were you in there?
Yeah,
were you
that was our first race with you.
I just messed it up because it was so hot and I just didn't take enough water or anything with me. And then that thing that you always say in triathlons, don't try anything race you've never tried before. Well, I ran out of water halfway on the bike, and it was suffocatingly hot. Halfway on the bike, I ran out of water, got into transition, was so dehydrated, I then poured my water all over the ground, so had no water. Thought, I'll go on the run and I'll get something there. And there wasn't anything. There weren't any aid stations for ages. And then they were offering water and Gatorade. And I was like, I don't even know what that is, so I'm not going to try it. And of course, it was a wonderfully sugary electrolyte drink, which would have made my life so much easier. So you were much better than me. I was just really inexperienced.
Well, it's amazing. As you say, though, it's an amazing experience to be part of that, and that whole setup of the qualifications and everything as well becomes part of your life, doesn't it, really? But taking you back to the swimming, so you mentioned about your having been a competitive swimmer. So what are your memories of that time and then stopping and giving that up?
What do I remember from that time? Looking back now, I mean, I really wish I hadn't given it up because it meant so much to me. I loved the racing. I loved the training. It was right in the middle of, I did O levels. Did you do O levels?
Yeah.
Not even GCSEs. So right in the middle of sort of exam season, I was having a hard time at home. And the one thing that was kind of getting me through was the swimming. But I just made this, literally, it was a day-to-day decision. I looked in the mirror, saw these muscly shoulders, thought it made me look too masculine, and gave it up because I knew it was the swimming from one day to the next. And what a terrible, sad thing to do, because I was, as I say, I was going through sort of difficult, teenage years are difficult anyway, but particularly difficult time at that time. And that's when I gave up. And I wish somebody had just, sat me down and go, Louise, look, never mind about the shoulders. This is doing extraordinary things for you and you need to keep going.
And do you think attitudes are changing now? So you've got daughters. Do you think attitudes to body image and muscularity and so on are changing?
I think that's a difficult one, isn't it? Because lots of people talk to me about how difficult it is for teenagers now. And I accept, and it is, believe me, of course it is, with all that sort of Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, beautiful bodies coming at you from left, right and centre. But, look at what I did. So, I was under similar pressure that many years ago. So has it changed? I mean, I hope it's changing. And I hope, all I'm trying to do with my daughters, and we can talk, one of them, as you know, has just done the London Marathon with me, which is amazing, age 21. I'm just trying to do sport because they can see that it really makes a massive difference to my physical and mental health. And it's part of my character. It's part of what I do. And that's what I want it to be for them. I want it to be a solace and their happy place that they can go to when times are tough. And if we could get that message across, that it's not, I don't do this to look good. I do it to feel good. And also because it means that when I'm going around London, like I was this week with 15 books in an enormous bag, I can carry them and run for a train at the same time.
Love it. You're so strong. As I finished my triathlon adventures, I moved into a bit of competitive master swimming in the pool for a year or so. And then I eased down into open water swimming. But you were ramping things up at that time. So can you tell us a bit more about that move into those endurance events? What were the first endurance events that you did?
So I went from doing Olympic distance, which is sort of, the swim is about 1,500 meters, the bike is about 40K, and the run is 10K. I went from that straight to doing Ironman distance, which is, most people would go through the middle in between, wouldn't they? But so that's a 3.8 kilometer swim, 180K bike, and a marathon. And also I went to go, not even, because Ironman is a brand, isn't it? But I didn't even do Ironman. I went for extreme triathlon, and that means that it's point to point. So you get in, and the first one I do is Patagon Man in Chile. You jump off a ferry in the dark, and then you go from that place, you do your swim, you do your incredible bike ride through the mountains, and then the marathon. And you end up something like 220 kilometers away from where you start. So, I mean, that is a bit bonkers, isn't it? But the reason I did it was because I loved all that, the GB team stuff, but it gets, it's very intense, isn't it? You know that. And I sort of felt I'd sort of tick the box on that. And I was coming up to 50 and I wanted to do something to celebrate my 50th. And that seemed like a good idea.
It's just bonkers when you say it like that, and you think. I mean, I didn't know you at the time, and I remember you talking about it. I didn't realise it was from point to point. I think that had never clocked that. Right. But that's just mad, isn't it, to take that jump?
And also, from the thing about the point to point thing, and also about doing extreme triathlon. So if you did, a branded event of that distance and an Ironman, let's talk about
just
Ironman,
an Ironman, just an Ironman. Yeah.
But you'd probably do it, and they have, apparently, I don't know because I've never done one. Like aid stations, water stations, food, blah blah.
You come into a tent to get changed, don't you? And yeah.
Well, then, I mean, we're changing the car park, and they were like, nudity is allowed. Because you'd got out of freezing cold water. Anyway, so the thing about that is that also it's there's no official support. So my husband was being support, and he had to literally be in about 3 different places, for example, on the bike, ready with all the gear that I might need. And he was utterly brilliant. But, the worst thing was at the end of this, he'd obviously got up at 3 a.m. like I had. He'd been driving all day, and we ended up 200 kilometers away from where we were staying. The most dangerous thing we did that day was him driving us back, because it took me a very long time. It took me 16 and a half hours.
Oh my God. And what did you love? The first ones that you did you, obviously it was arduous and all those things, but did you get the bug for it then from that first one?
From the extreme one or from the first triathlon?
The extreme ones.
The extreme one. I think what I got from that is, and that's why I continue to do sort of really different things now, is what I find really empowering is my own little legs or my own little arms when it's swimming can get me a very long way. And I love being outside and I love being on my own outside because they're vast spaces. I mean, I think I ran 10K of the marathon. I mean, I didn't run it, actually, to be honest. I walked a lot of it in the middle of nowhere with these galloping horses beside me in the Chilean Patagonia. It was extraordinary. So I love feeling really small and insignificant in vast spaces of our beautiful world. So for me, it's really moved to much more being outdoors and sort of endurance outdoors and enjoying that, actually.
Brilliant. And I'm going to talk to you about that. I'm going to just circle back a little bit. I'm going to talk about a bit of a switch up to talk about menopause, because I think we're talking about it more than we ever have before, generally in public. And I know Davina McCall rightly gets lots of praise for her campaigning, but I do remember you're being really open about it and talking about it on the BBC, which must have been around the time of your competing in triathlon. So I just wondered, how that impacted your involvement in the sport at the time.
Okay, so interesting. So yes, I was before Davina. Thanks for pointing it out. We did a massive week on BBC Breakfast, which is called Wake Up to Menopause. And it was inspired by me because I'd been having a really hard time. There's lots of different symptoms, but at my worst, I had 26 different symptoms, from tinnitus to, achy limbs, to hot sweats, like I'd run a marathon in a jungle in, Malaysia, to psychological things, terrible brain fog. So there was a lot going on. And actually, triathlon and sport was very important to me during those times, because when I was going out to do my swim or my bike or my run, those were the times where I felt my calmest, where I felt I wasn't, the crazy busy thoughts that I was having. I was having very intense thoughts, and, it gave me solace. It gave me somewhere to be on my own and to have space. And it probably, physically really helped me as well. I mean, I really couldn't. And I'm really honest about it. I'm on HRT now, so that massively helps. But I know the sport really guided me through those times and gave me a space where I could just take a bit of it sounds silly, take my foot off the accelerator, because I had it on the accelerator in a different way.
And how did it feel to talk so publicly about it on television? Because that's being fearless and being brave, but that must have been quite something at the time. And again, I do feel now we're talking about it more, but we weren't.
I know. At the time, we were not talking about it. Davina had not done her documentary, and it felt very scary, because at the time, and even now, well, certainly at the time, the reason we did this was because it was so taboo to talk about it. And I just thought it was possibly career ending, choosing to do that. Wasn't it? I mean, it could have been. They could have just, all those things that people think about women with menopause and how they can't cope, or, terrible things that we're trying to change. And it felt like I was sort of jumping off a cliff, not really knowing, like jumping off the ferry, but not knowing whether the orcas in Patagonia were going to eat me, which they didn't. And it turned out it was all right with the menopause too. And we had a massive response, and I know we changed people's lives. And you work in PR, you know very well that the personal is always the most powerful. And I knew that for it to work and work really well, it had to be me. And at the time, I wasn't on HRT. And I look at the video that I did now, and I feel very sorry for that Louise, because I was so vulnerable. But it was brilliant, because I couldn't have expressed it now in the way that I did then. So it's just, it's a strange thing to have done, but I'm very glad I did it.
Yeah, good. I commend you now, looking back on it now. And you obviously left the BBC. You haven't been on that sofa for 20 years, not in its entirety, but 20 years. So we talk a lot in sport, don't we, about the challenge of elite athletes to find that new identity when they're no longer competing. So how have you found that now you're no longer the breakfast presenter?
I think because I found it before I left. And I think that's probably, athletes, it's different, isn't it? Because they can't focus on something else at the same time, probably. But, I think now I'm a writer. Now I've got my second book. I think I am a writer, and I'm writing something else, by the way. Can't tell you a secret, but I am still writing. So I feel that this is and somebody said to me the other day, it's like an encore career. It's this, hopefully, now I'm on to my third. This is a career or the makings of. But I think I found what I wanted to do when I was there. And it's so related to sport and it's so related to telling stories. So so I feel very lucky that actually it's been a much easier transition. And also I knew when I left, I had already planned to write the book we'll talk about in a minute. But and that's given me a year and a half of doing that. So I was okay with that transition. I really was. But it's all about planning ahead, I think, and not, as I just said before, jumping off the cliff with nothing to land on, because I think that can be very difficult for people.
And you've gone on, we're talking about writing and, the podcasting and everything, but you've gone on to do some really extraordinary adventures in other ways too. So what was it like on I'm a Celebrity, for instance?
Well, they had asked me quite a few years before, like quite a few times. And I had always said no, because I was on BBC Breakfast and I just couldn't really see how the two would match and whether they'd let me do it and all the rest of it. And so when I came out, I think first phone call was from somebody to ask me to chair the Women's Prize for Fiction. Second was from I'm a Celebrity. And I thought I was going to say no. I went for a meeting with them, but I really I've always wanted to do it, but I wasn't quite sure it was the right time. And, I think, if you go on a program like that, I had 2 teenage girls, and that was my biggest concern, that I wasn't going to really, really be terrible, excruciatingly embarrassing mum. But anyway, I went on it, and actually I'm so glad I did it. So glad I did it then, because it was one of those things I always wanted to do in my life. And sometimes I think you just got to get on and do them rather than, because otherwise I would have spent the year going, oh gosh, am I, aren't I, lots of pressure. I just thought, right, let's just get this done in a good way. And it was amazing. So glad I did it. Would I do it again? Not in the castle, probably. It was so cold in Wales. It was so cold. And it's really hard. You will know, as I call myself an athlete, obviously I'm a slow athlete, that moving is part of my life. It's in my character. It's in my DNA. And not to be able to do that was very difficult. It really was.
And you said about not wanting to embarrass your daughters or whatever, but you clearly didn't. How do you think it changed people's perceptions of you? Because I feel I knew a little bit of you, but for me it was fantastic that people got to see you and know you.
I hope. I don't know. It's difficult to say, really, because I didn't watch it. I haven't watched it actually at all, by the way. No, not even. No, none of it. Somebody gave me really good advice when I came out. They said, what happened in there. Don't let what was shown on telly change what you think. Yeah, which was nice. I think, what did people see? That I'm probably a pretty normal person, that I didn't realize, it sounds ridiculous, but I didn't realize how much I need to care for people. Yeah. And I became this, it's a bit of a cliche, isn't it? I became the mum, and I don't really see myself. I mean, I am a mum, and that's my most important job in my life, actually. But I don't see myself as, and don't want to be rude, mumsy. I don't want to be rude, because I just do so to me, to anybody else. But I just became this mother hen, and I literally had these 5 chickens or babies that I had to look after. And it was, and actually it was really great, because it gave me something to do. And I love them, and they're still, I'm still in contact with all of them.
Oh, it's brilliant. And the other thing I was going to ask you about was your MasterChef adventures. And just what is that like to be cooking in the studio in front of cameras and people?
I mean, I think there's a bit of I have something in my brain which, makes me do stuff that other people would shy away from. Yeah, I mean, most people wouldn't talk about menopause in front of 6 million people. I think those are probably sensible people, by the way. And my friends, when I told them I was going to go on MasterChef, because I was not a cook at the time. I really, if I've got carrots and hummus in the fridge, I'm fine. If my husband's not here, it's baked beans if I'm pushing the boat out. So I really wasn't into cooking. And they were just like, are you serious? And the brilliant thing about being, that I do sort of have a strange switch in my brain was that I don't know what can go wrong. Okay. So I would do a souffle because I think would be delicious, because I love souffles, but not know that actually you can make massive mistake with the souffle. And that's hugely empowering. So I really enjoyed it. They were amazing. They were very, very kind to me. I think because I just had that kind of like can do, let's give it a try attitude. And it changed my life forever. I mean, I now really, I really can cook, and I get quite upset when people come around, and because it was always my husband, David, who was the cook. And, it was kind of well known that he was the one who, did the cooking, etc. So he would have cooked for lunch, and people come around, oh, David, it's so delicious. I'm like, actually, excuse me. I've just spent the whole day in the kitchen. It was actually me. So it was I felt very lucky to have done that. Very lucky.
That's brilliant, isn't it? And we mentioned your fabulous book, Dare to Try, and I'm so excited that the new book, Fearless, is out now. So can you tell us a little bit more about it and what motivated you to write it, or to the journey to write it?
I mean, when you read your intro about your podcast, this is basically written for your podcast, isn't it? So it's called Fearless Adventures with Extraordinary Women. And one of the things I'm really passionate about, and why I'm so glad to be talking to you, is that I think that women's stories need to be told. I don't think they're told in the same way as men's stories. And specifically for me, we've talked about endurance. That's my passion. I'm hugely passionate about what I would think is the transformative power of sport for everybody. And I'm also passionate that we should have heroes that look like us. So I sat there on that sofa, and one day I've interviewed lots of amazing men who've run superhuman distances, who've climbed the highest mountains. And it was another interview about that sort of story. And it was a man. And I just thought, hang on a second. What's going on here? Is it that women are not doing these things? You know the answer, because you talk about it all the time. Or is it that they don't make the headlines? And I just thought, I've spent many years fighting lots of different battles, including an equal pay battle at the BBC. Also a battle to read the headlines first rather than my male co-presenter. And I thought I could spend years trying to change things, or I could just go and do it myself and do it the way I love best, which is go find the women first of all, and then go and do what they love with them. Because I think if you stand beside people, you just get a whole different perspective. And it started small, and then it ended up with me cycling most of the way across Argentina, free diving under ice in the dark with Kath Pendleton, who is an incredible ice swimmer. I met some extraordinarily brilliant, brave, intrepid women, and this is really their stories put together. It's like it's a boy's own adventure, except there are no boys.
And I think what you said there, when I read it, I expected to hear you sharing the stories of these amazing women, but I didn't expect that you would be undertaking those challenges with them. And I don't know, that did really, really surprise me. And proper scary stuff, as you said too. So I think the one that scared me most, the thought of, is the wild, it opens actually, doesn't it? The wild caving. So how was that? Good Lord.
I'm glad you say that, because some people would be fine with that. So the lady I met is called Christine Grossart, and she is a paramedic and also a cave diver / explorer. So her idea of fun is to get in with her diving gear, is to walk into a cave, dive through a small hole, swim for 200 meters with her diving gear on in the dark. I mean, the dark is, I can't even, because there is no light there. There's nothing down there. Come up, walk across, squeeze through something else, get with the diving gear, go. Utterly unbelievable. And she took me wild caving, it's called, and wild because there's nothing down there under the hills in the Mendips. And I'm claustrophobic, and it was okay. So lots of people will find that a really difficult chapter.
It is hard to read, and there's a bit where they turn the lights, and where you turn your torches off, whatever, and just and that made me. I mean, it's really fantastic to read, but it made me. I felt that anxiety in your description of that moment.
Yeah, it felt like you were sort of out of space, like in a black hole, because there's no darkness that I know in the world that is dark as it can be, 2 hours into a cave system. And she made us turn off our lights, because the key thing is in that type of caving is that if your lights go, you do not move, because you don't know that there isn't a 20-foot drop beside you. You literally have to wait it out. I mean, I get scared even thinking about it. And I mean, I've learned a lot, like you have, through sport, and I've learned a lot about how to control, you know, when my heart rate's going up and my breathing and all the rest of it. And I just had to go at the front of the three of us and just sit there and literally have a real talking to myself, going, Louise, you need to calm down, because the more panic you get, you know, it's just going to spiral out of control. So she was amazing, but they were amazing. They all, you know, there are lots of things in the book which, you know, for example, I did this incredible swim, the escape from Alcatraz, which for me, it was really scary, but for me, that's kind of fun. So, but other people will find that hugely challenging. Yeah. And that's what I loved about all these different women. They've all got breaking, you know, pushing through boundaries and breaking barriers in lots of different areas. And to be able to sort of walk alongside them and do it with them and see what they do and how they do it was just an amazing journey, actually.
And the other one that really scared me was the ice-free diving.
Yeah, that's...
I know, and I like the cold. I do like the cold water swimming, but I think it might be for me again. I'm thinking, what was the thing? I think it's that claustrophobia, going under the water. They're not the panic of not being able to see the other end of. And again, your description of it, the way you articulate it, it's just fantastic. It feels like I've been there doing them with you.
This was with Kath Pendleton, who I mentioned already, who is a brilliant athlete. So she's swum the southernmost mile. So in the Antarctic Circle, she swam, and you love cold water, but you know, this was, I think it was just above freezing. She swam a mile, which took her just over 30 minutes, you know, in a swimming costume. She loves the cold. I love swimming. And she said to me, why don't we go free diving? And I'm, as you know from this podcast, I'm like, oh, how hard can that be? Well, very hard, as it turns out. I had to do a course to learn how to free dive. You do not do this at home or on your own, because it's extremely dangerous, because you're diving, going under the water with no oxygen. And then we decided that we would go do this in Finland under the ice. And our first dive was in the dark. I mean, she does say it was a bit like having done, you know, a lesson in a dry ski slope and going down a black run. I mean, it blew my mind that, but yes, it was utterly, I mean, you know, it was one of those moments when when if you've been in an accident or something, you know, time has this kind of thing where it sort of stretches and slows, doesn't it? And I'm under the ice thinking, and it's all fine for about 2 seconds. Then I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm going to die.
Yeah. You do write so beautifully, because I do, in each of the chapters, I feel like I've been there. I'm exhausted. I've experienced that with you.
It's quite, I would say about the book, hopefully it's really inspiring, but I read the first 4 chapters and I was exhausted, and I've done it.
There was a section in the chapter with Belinda Kirk, actually, which really, really resonated with me. And she talked about how doing a challenge you can find intimidating can really unlock your potential, especially for women, because it shows that we can do so much more than we think we can. And I think for me, that's definitely something with my cold water swimming, that sense of personal accomplishment that creates that positive feedback loop. And I hadn't really thought about it until I'd read your book, that's why adventure sport can be so transformational, that you step out of life, do something that makes you feel brave and fearless, then bring it back into your career or your relationship and so on.
She's written a brilliant book. I'll just give her a heads up on everybody on that. It's called Adventure Revolution. And Belinda Kirk is an explorer and expedition leader. And we did a 2-day walk across Dartmoor, which you think might be easy. No, because we did actually a 3-day walk in 2 days. and in the middle of it, I genuinely thought we were in trouble, because she got stuck in a bog with there was no mobile phone signal in the middle of beautiful Dartmoor. Anyway, long story short, she really believes, and I entirely am with her, about the transformative power of adventure, and particularly pushing at your boundaries and going beyond your boundaries. And what I loved about her is your boundaries could be anything. For some, you know, it could be 1 mile walking. You know, all our boundaries are different, aren't they? But if you push yourself beyond your boundaries, it gives you that confidence to think, oh, hang on a second, I actually did that. And it's not even, I don't think it's conscious, because I know, for example, when I was sitting in there in the cave, getting towards what would probably be a panic attack, all that stuff is in my brain and it's in my DNA, and it makes me much calmer in that situation. But I know, for example, like when I'm nervous, and I do lots of different things, there is a particular moment in a triathlon, actually, where I was swimming in Liverpool, and it sounds ridiculous, but I've been in that rumble tumble washing machine at the start. Somebody had knocked off my goggles. I was very, very panicky. And then I'd managed to settle into this pace. And I looked down and I saw these beautiful, what I thought were fish floating. In fact, they were jellyfish. But I had this moment of calm, which if I'm ever in a very stressful situation, I just close my eyes and I think of that moment, and it empowers me. I'm suddenly okay. So yeah, but she's really good on how pushing yourself, challenging yourself, doing things that you think are hard can change you and be really empowering in other parts of your life. And for example, I ran the marathon with my daughter, just ran the land marathon with her. And she's 21. And, I know, and that marathons are a mental game, right? And she at 30K, so 2/3 of the way through, really hit the wall sort of emotionally. And she got through it. And I said to her when we were walking around Buckingham Palace, we should have been running. I said, you've done a really tough thing. And that means when something else that's challenging your life comes along, you've got something in the bank which is going to help you get through it. And I think that's a really important message for everybody there, that go out and do whatever it is, camp overnight or something that you find challenging will help you in other ways that you probably can't even measure.
I think that's almost, for me, from the book, that was almost the most important resonating message to share. But how do you think those challenges have changed you? Have they given you the confidence to do and become an author and, the other things that you've taken on?
Yeah, definitely. So one of the things, for example, that I did was I've just been I am chair of the Women's Prize for Fiction. And again, Kate Moss, who is the writer behind it, has asked me for years. And I've always said no, because I always thought, gosh, it's such an onerous, responsible thing to do. I feel like it's sort of imposter syndrome. And actually I thought, hang on, Louise, listen to all those things. Exactly, your face. I wish everybody could have seen her face, by the way. Yeah, exactly. Louise, get over yourself. And so she asked me to be judge. I said yes. And then she asked me to be chair. And I thought, well, if I'm going out and telling people that challenging yourself is a good thing, do it. So I've done it, and it has been the most amazing. I'm looking at on my bookshelves here. I've read over 70 books. It's been an incredible, empowering, brilliant thing to do. We've got a fabulous shortlist, which we've recently announced, and I have absolutely loved it. So I think if I hadn't done these things, I would never have said yes. I wouldn't have done.
You obviously have achieved so much since you've left BBC Breakfast, and I'm almost scared to ask, but what is next? Have you got other challenges in mind? Are there things you've never achieved that you would like to go on to do?
So what's next? That's a very good question. So obviously I'm really passionate about, it's interesting having spent a year writing and researching that book. What's lovely is getting it into the hands of readers like you. So I'm going to really put my effort behind it to try and make that. I want these women's stories to be heard. So I'm going to put effort into that and doing lots of fun things and publicity tour and everything. So that's kind of for the next few months. And then I am writing, and I'm writing something that I really can't tell you about, but I'm super excited about it. And I think for me, if I can keep writing, that is where I find I'm kind of two parts of we flip a coin, and one sometimes I'm really gregarious and I want to, go out there and talk to lots of people. And actually other times, and I so love what you've said about my writing, I get in the moment, I get in a space, and I want to write something that's really visceral and reaches people. And thank you for saying that, because nobody's ever said that to me before. So I'm quite emotional, actually.
Yay.
But if I could write good stuff, I would be really, really pleased.
That's brilliant. And physical adventures. So is there anything, what have you not done? But is there anything left to climb, swim, trek? Is there?
Oh, there's a run that somebody keeps. I can't even tell you, because as soon, you know what it's like. As soon as you tell someone you're going to have to do it, it's out there. There's a run. Yeah. It's an ultra run that I want it. God, I just said it, didn't I? I want to do. I just said it. So I'm trying to say no at this point, but I know what the answer is. But I'm not going to tell you, because then I'm going to have to really commit. So there's a run, and I'm not even a runner. But yeah, I don't know. But I'm always. I think, something will come along, and I'm very susceptible to ideas, and hopefully somebody will come and it'll just tickle in my brain, and I'll go, all right, I'm in. So if anybody's got any ideas, I'm always open to listening.
And just finally, what would you say to any women in their 40s and 50s who perhaps feel their sporty days are behind them, or they haven't done stuff for years? What would your thoughts be?
What would my thoughts be? I just think it gives me so much in my life. And I just look at the friends that I've made over the last year and the people I've met through triathlon, all the rest of it. I think try and find what it is that you love, because then it's not a chore. It might be like yours is cold water swimming. I mean, I'm out on that. I kind of like it, but not really. But find it is, all these women that I've talked to, it is not just what they're passionate about. It's part of their DNA, and they, that's what they want to do. So it might be yoga, it might be, I don't know, it might be skating, it might be something, but just go and find something and keep trying until it is. And it needs to be part of your life. For me, that's what I do. I do sport, and I do it pretty much every day in some form. And make it easy for yourself. Make it something that you enjoy, that's something you can and do with other people as well. Like, look, I just ran the marathon with my daughter. It's amazing. But yeah, just keep looking for the one little thing that is your spark and that challenges you as well. Maybe that would be my advice. Something, and there's always that thing of, like, that's why I'm not saying what run it is. Vocalize it, put it in your diary, and guess what? I bet you end up doing it.
It was so lovely to chat to Louise. I really recommend reading Fearless if you have the chance. It certainly made me think a lot more about future challenges in my life. Head over to fearlesswomen.co.uk to find previous episodes where I've spoken to other trailblazing women in sport. There are over 110 of them featured, including elite athletes, broadcasters, coaches, administrators, and CEOs. As well as listening to all the podcasts on the website, you can also find out more about the Women's Sport Collective, a free, inclusive community for all women working in sport. You can sign up for the Fearless Women newsletter, which highlights the developments in global women's sport. And there's more about my book, Game On, The Unstoppable Rise of Women's Sport. Thanks again to Sport England for backing the Game Changers with a National Lottery Award, and to Sam Walker at What Goes On Media, who does such a great job as our executive producer. Thank you also to my brilliant colleague at Fearless Women, Kate Hannon. The Game Changers is free to listen to, and you can find it on all podcast platforms. Do follow us or subscribe to make sure you don't miss out on future episodes. And if you could leave a rating or a review, that would be so much appreciated, as it really does help us to reach new audiences. Do come and say hello on social media. Well, you'll find me on Twitter, LinkedIn and Instagram at Sue Anstis. The Game Changers. Fearless Women in Sport.